compound versus longbow. Obviously, I came up, I attended your course, which was awesome. And, we made a longbow from a chunk of hardwood from scratch, really only leveraging 2 tools. And I gave you the choice of compound versus long, which really is modern versus traditional, and you pick long. What's the why?
Well, I mean, for starters, I've built my full-time career around the longbow. I really feel like it's the true spirit of archery. I kind of see these, modern compounds that are starting to look a lot more like arrow machines, really, than bows. And they're similar, really, in the way that they shoot an arrow, but that's about it. So just with me making longbows from scratch, bringing people here to make longbows, and building a business around the longbow, it's an obvious choice for me.
Yeah, no doubt. And I kind of, after coming up there, hanging out for 3.5-4 days, and building that thing from scratch, you have a more of an appreciation from that traditional side than going to your local sporting goods store and just buying something off a rack, and then spending extra money on tuning it up so that it's just as cool as all the others on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And there is this fascination with guys like Joe Rogan and Jocko and some other people that have kind of brought that whole bow world mainstream, right? Have you noticed that? Is that something new? It seems to me like I was doing bow stuff in Boy Scouts, and I did it with my daughter, and then all of a sudden now I see it all the time. Have you noticed that as well?
I think there's definitely a big sort of upshift in people taking up archery, and it probably has a lot to do with Joe Rogan and a lot of the guests that he has on there, Jocko and, Cam Haynes and guys like that. So it's definitely popular right now. And the compound archery kind of, I think, gives people a lower barrier to entry, because you can go to a store, have a pro shop set it up. And then within, a short period of time, a couple weeks of practice, you can be lethal enough with that weapon to be able to ethically hunt. Whereas somebody who's picking up maybe traditional archery for the first time is looking at maybe a couple of years, especially if they want to build their own equipment. We're talking, 2 to 5 years to master the craft. And then that's shooting aside. Traditional archery is more of like a committed daily practice, like a martial art, something that you'd have to dedicate a lot of time to.
But what I thought is best is like you on your Instagram, which is Organic Archer, for those of you interested. You hang like, and you're like, hey, this is the best exercise for anybody that is into archery, and that is just get on the bar and hang, right? Can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, just the max effort, relaxed dead hang is one of my favorites for rehabilitation. With all the pulling and stuff that I do for work and everything, your back starts to get tight, a lot of bent over activities, stuff like that. So not only is it decompressing the spine, sort of increasing your shoulder mobility, it can relieve a lot of the pressures that archers get, because rotator cuff injuries are a big deal. It's kind of an awkward movement, especially with those compound bows, a lot of rotator injuries. So it takes some of the stress off of that. And then as a byproduct, it just happens to build a massive grip, which is great for hand tools, obviously, and pulling heavy bows. Because for people that don't know, a longbow has no let off. So when you pull a compound, you hit that wall at, say, 18 to 20 inches, and then it breaks. And then you're holding maybe, say, 17 to 20% of the total draw weight. But with a longbow, it just stacks up in draw weight until the maximum draw out to the corner of the mouth. So you got to have a fairly strong grip if you're going to be shooting heavy bows. It's just one of my favorite rehabilitative exercises to stretch out the spine, improve your posture, and relieve a lot of the aches and the pains that come from archery. As just a cool byproduct, you get a big grip.
Alone, we have to touch on alone. So you're alone. You were hanging out by yourself in your season was just below the Arctic. Was it the ring, Arctic Ring, or where were you guys? Yeah.
We were just above the Arctic Circle in the Northwest Territories of Canada.
That's right.
At Great Slave Lake, and it's in the Yellowknife area.
Yeah. And then so for people that don't know, Alone literally is a show about these what do you call yourselves? Contestants, right? These people on the show, they're all dumped out via helicopter or jet boat, into different areas and completely raw wilderness environments. And it's just them by themselves with basically a Pelican case full of fucking cameras, batteries, probably SD cards, and then 10 pieces of gear. And then I'll let you kind of take it from there. If you haven't watched the show, you should. Season 7, Correy was in. You should watch it. There's so much to learn, but kind of go through the number of days you were there and the experience that you had.
Yeah, so you were right about some of the gear. Big Pelican cases full of cameras. For anyone that doesn't know, it is 100% self-filmed. All the footage that you see from the contestants is self-filmed, mixed in with a little bit of professional B-roll that they throw in, for cinematics. But it's 10 pieces of gear that you select, 10 survival items from a fairly narrow list of probably maybe 30-ish things that the production crew has deemed acceptable survival items. So you pick your 10 from a very narrow list, and then you get a certain amount of clothing that doesn't count against you. You get like a base layer, a couple pairs of underwear, 2 pairs of pants, like 2 or I don't remember how many pairs of socks, but you have enough clothing that clothing is not an issue.
Yeah. Good.
And then, like I said, they take 10 contestants out into the most remote and dangerous regions of the world. It's always somewhere very cold because the cold breaks people. Wouldn't be that much of a show if everyone was just on tropical islands, eating coconuts and mangoes all day. Yeah. So it's always somewhere very cold. It's always a launch right before the winter starts. You got about 2 to 3 weeks before that first snowfall. So they want you there with enough time to get set up, but also with food scarcity approaching very quickly. Icing over of the water sources, things like that. So it's always very close to winter. And then you're dropped off with your equipment, and that's it. You're alone, starting from scratch. You got nothing but what they call your drop zone, which is just a big area that they've deemed your zone. It's kind of blocked off by GPS coordinates. You have this little tracking device on you, so you have a very large piece of land that you can roam through. But if you hit your boundaries, you'll get beeped and say like, hey, you're at your personal boundary, like turn back. So you have a very large piece of cordoned off land that you can survive from. And then that's it. They fly off. You're supposed to film basically full time. You shoot for about 40 hours a week, hopefully. So you carry these fucking cameras everywhere. It's a huge pain. Got to remember to get the shot. So it makes survival exponentially harder because you have to get the shot. So not only do you have to walk down to the lake to start fishing, you got to walk down to the lake, place the camera there, walk back up, and then walk back to the lake on film. So you're doing everything twice, mostly, just because you've got to set up the cameras constantly. You're always filming. And for anyone that's curious, there's a lot of, haters on the internet. They're like, this isn't really self-filmed. There's a crew like right outside, that's just waiting with gear and everyone's getting snacks and stuff. It is 100% legit. There's no crew. The crew is like 10 miles away, helicopter flight at a base camp so that they can provide you emergency life-saving medical care if you need it. But if a crew has to intervene with you at any time, you're disqualified. So if you get an injury and you call and be like, hey, whoops, cut myself. Like, would you guys mind coming to take a look at it? If that's not a fatal injury or, if it's not serious and you don't need medical extraction, you still forfeited your chance because you had to be intervened with. So the only time you see the crew is the occasional medical check every 10 to 14 days. You get a med check, come out, they weigh you, they take your vitals, make sure your weight loss is on track, make sure it's not getting too extreme, make sure your organs are functioning properly. From usually fairly extreme starvation. I got dropped off. They don't really show this, but I was telling the camera like, hey, I'm not gonna do anything for the first 2 days except explore my zone. So that's what I did. Hiked every property boundary in my entire zone, looking for the best place to make a shelter. Ended up setting up on a shore of a lake. Spent the next 5 days building my shelter. And of course, they don't show this either. But I'm sitting there saying, like, okay, I'm not focusing on food. I have plenty of calories. I'm feeling very energized right now. Got, plenty of storage. So I'm just going to focus for 5 days on my shelter.
So just shelter and water, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Staying hydrated and getting the shelter locked in.
Yeah.
So had a shelter that I was real happy with. Went with a compact A-frame. Everything was going great, but about on the third day of building my shelter, I was carrying a large piece of timber on my shoulder for sort of the bed frame that I was building. I had, some like probably 6 to 8 inch logs as a bed frame base to kind of give me a little bit of an extra insulation off the ground. And the terrain in the Northwest Territories is ridiculously slippery and treacherous. It's this pillow moss that grows like, I don't know, 18 inches deep. And it's just like walking on in like deep mud all the time. And it's very thick and very hard to walk through and very slippery. And all the rocks get covered in this lichen that basically makes them like ice. The rocks there, if they're wet, which happens almost every day, some form of precipitation, whether it's just mist in the mornings or, rainfall, they become very, very slippery, like take your feet out from under you cartoon style. And so you're always paying attention to every step and trying your best not to get some sort of leverage injury or some sort of fracture or, fall down on a rock or something like that. Going about my business, carrying a big timber on my shoulders. And I just slipped into a hole that was not visible from the surface. It was covered in pillow moss and it was between 2 big pieces of granite, and my leg went in there at just the right angle. And I felt a loud snap, heard a loud pop in my knee. And I thought, oh shit, that's probably not good. Like I've injured my knees before. I'm like, I know what that audible pop means. So didn't think anything of it, carried on, finished out my shelter. 2 days or so goes by. Really wasn't feeling it that much. A little stiff at night, but no big deal. Just kind of was working through it. And then around day probably 7 or 8, the swelling started to happen. And it started to balloon up full of fluids. And I had this big cyst on the back of my leg. And by then I was really focused on food. So I had set my trap line. I had built a gill net from 550 cord and had launched that. And it was catching fish every day. I was just getting ready to start bow hunting after I had got all my passive, food methods set up. But then by like day 8 or so, the swelling was really intense. I'm just like, okay, this is pretty intense. I think I got 2 more weeks left in me. I'm just going to go, one more day. So I go one more day, and then I start to get fevers in my sleep at night. And I'm like, okay, one more day. So I was hoping, I'm like, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks for this to heal. I think if I just take it easy, just walk around, without any extra weight and bow hunt, I'll be fine. Check my traps. Not really my shelter's finished. Not really that big of a deal. By day 9, I start getting fevers in my sleep. By day 10, if I even brushed up against my knee in my sleep, it would wake me up and just couldn't get back to sleep. I had kind of like a burning hot fever from my hip to my ankle in my left leg. And just one more day myself to day 12. And I'm like, this is definitely not going to get better. Like, this is a pretty serious injury. So ended up having to tap out on day 12. Got flown straight to the hospital. Found out I tore my MCL and my meniscus. So that was the end for me. Definitely didn't go as I had planned.
Yeah.
Had a lot left in the tank, but you never know. There can only be one winner on that show, and there are a lot of injuries. So,
wow, man, and what I've noticed, is it turns into a starvation contest towards the end. It seems with each of these seasons, especially the more recent ones. But man, I feel for you, because that sucks. That's one of those things you just can't control. So I'm sure for you it was kind of mentally like a total letdown. But then once you realize, hey, life's all about those buckets, man. I tell people all the time, there's 3 buckets. There's the control bucket, the things you can control bucket, the things you can't control bucket, and then there's the things you can influence bucket, right?
Yeah.
So, which tends to kind of push towards maybe I can control it if I influence properly, but that was definitely in the you can't control that bucket, and that fucking sucks. Yeah.
I'm still thankful for the experience.
Hell yeah. You're listening to Can You Survive This podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, and share on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.